welcome back to our channel, the YAJE Media channel. Today I will be sharing with you a not so fat loss friendly recipe, the popular puff puff or beignet. I have a killer recipe for you, and if you hang tight, I'll show you exactly how I make my beignet. Again, yes, healthy living, but it's not about perfection. So if you eat something that's questionable some of the time, you should be okay. If you're following that 80-20 rule where 80% of the time you're eating according to your goals, then the 20% of the time you can enjoy something, right? And so beignet is one of the things that I will occasionally indulge in. So let me share the recipe with you today. And it's always better when you cook yours at home, right? When you take the time to make yours, it's always better. So I'll show you my recipe.
An African woman, strong, powerful. Let go.
When it comes to puff puff, I am such a traditionalist. I like to make my puff puff or my beignet the old-fashioned way, the way that I grew up eating puff puff by the ladies in the quartier, right? The mommy puff puff. Growing up, you were lucky to get 3 balls of puff puff, or maybe 5 if you were really lucky, because you had a huge family and they would send you to go buy puff puff for 200 francs, which is about 20 balls for a household of about 8 to 10 people. So you can see that portion control was already built in. But nowadays we can afford to make our own beignets and our own puff puff at home, and because of that you tend to eat more than the 3 or the 5 balls that usually that's what you would get growing up, which was not a problem. Anyway, not to waste too much of your time, again, I'm a traditionalist when it comes to puff puff, which means I keep it really simple. I use flour, I use salt, yeast and sugar. End of story, the end. None of that vanilla, nutmeg, eggs, milk, this and that and the other, just making it rich for no reason. I like my puff puff the old-fashioned with the basic ingredients. And my secret is I let it rise for a long time. I know nowadays everything is like, let's make beignet in 30 minutes. No, those ladies did not make beignets in 30 minutes or less. They used to mix that thing and wait either, they would do it in the evening and wait until the morning before they fry. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? That is to allow time for the yeast to really do its job, ferment the dough. So you had that little bit of a sourdough kind of tasting puff puff. And at that point, the sugar that is in the recipe, in the dough, has already been mostly converted. That's why you get that sour tasting thing, which to me, that's the flavor that I look for in the puff puff. Puff puff to us was never dessert. It was never let me put a bunch of cinnamon and nutmeg and a bunch of sugar and then maybe dust additional sugar on top. No, we made puff puff and it was savory. We ate that with beans or with something else, or with even pepper sauce. That's to tell you this was not supposed to be something sweet. And that's the kind of puff puff that I am going to show you today. So for my puff puff, I use 1 kilogram of flour, which I try not to eyeball. I try to measure it as much as I can. In Cameroon, they already sold flour measured in 1 kilogram little thing. So that's easy. But when it comes to puff puff, my recipe is 1-1-1. So 1 kilogram of flour, which is what I'm trying to weigh out here. And if you read that blog post I did about kitchen gadgets, you would recognize the scale, which I use a whole lot, because when it comes to things with flour, I try not to eyeball. But if you've made this so many times, you can afford to eyeball it. So 1 kilogram of flour. All right, so that's my flour, 1 kilogram. And then over here, the second important thing when you're making puff puff is water and the temperature of the water. This water is warm. I put it in the microwave for about 2 minutes. You want it warm enough to activate the yeast, but not too hot so that it burns your finger. So you can see I can dip my finger and leave it in there. You know, it's warm, but it doesn't burn you. So that's what you want, that water temperature right there. Okay. And then you need sugar. This sugar is food for the yeast. The yeast is going to rise or not rise based on how much sugar that you have. It feeds the yeast because yeast is living. Most recipes, you know, use much more sugar than this. I tend to go on the least amount of sugar that I can get away with when it comes to desserts and baking and If I'm making it at home, I try to tweak it to use the least amount of sugar. So if you're a sweet tooth kind of person, you might want to go with 1 cup. But here it's about 1/2 to 2/3 of a cup. I use 10 tablespoons. That's about a little less, maybe 2/3 of a cup of sugar. So you want to dissolve that and let that dissolve. All right. So next I'm going to add the yeast. This is yeast. I use 1 tablespoon of yeast in my recipe. I'll get the tablespoon real quick. 1 tablespoon of yeast. And you want to add the yeast to this before you add any salt. Because what salt does is it can kill the yeast. It can kill the yeast cells. Remember I told you yeast is actually living. So at this point, if you're not sure of the quality of your yeast, you want to let it set for about 5 minutes so that, you know, you see that foaming action. When you see the thing start to foam, you know that, yes, the yeast is active. Because many times one has made beignet and then you set it to rise and you find that it never rises. That's because the yeast cells were dead. So to save yourself that embarrassment, maybe you want to wait for about 5 minutes just to make sure that the yeast is working right. But I'm sure about the quality of my yeast, so I do not need to wait the extra 5 minutes. Okay. Yeah, so always check to make, so look at like the expiration date of your yeast. This one expires in 2020. And I just opened it up today, so I think my yeast is good. I don't need to do anything extra. At this point, I add the flour to the water, the yeast sugar water mixture right there. And then I now add the salt. I now add the salt on top of that. I don't want the salt in direct contact with the yeast. So I'm going to go ahead and add the 1 teaspoon of salt. So 1 teaspoon of salt. And that's it. So I use my hands. Make sure your hands are clean. I use my hands because that's how I can tell if the mix is right or not. I don't use no fancy things. So just go ahead and mix this up. Mix the flour. Yeah. Again, I like to use my hands so I can tell if the texture is right. When you've done it so many times, you can usually tell if the texture is right or not. But with my recipe, the 1 liter of water, 1 kilogram of flour, usually 1 cup of sugar, but I kick it down to less than that because I don't need all that sugar. 1 tablespoon of yeast, 1 teaspoon of salt, and that's it. Then you just mix it. See? It's a perfect mix. But what I like to do is mix this for a while so that it begins to, like, you know, have that, how you call it in pidgin, so that it starts to draw, right? When that draw thing is because you've worked the gluten in the flour. Remember that remedy they used to mix puff inside some big magwa then. And it was an event to mix puff, right? If you remember. My mom sold puff at one time, so I remember, you know, we wanted to stay up and watch how they made this thing. that was so yummy, and you could only have so much of it. So I'm gonna mix this up for about a minute just to make sure I get that gluten action out. So this is what I'm looking for. This is the texture I'm looking for when the beignet will be ready to fry, like that. So we're gonna look for a warm place and just let this, or cover it up and let it rise. You can cover this with a Ziploc bag, but I'm gonna put this cloth over it and then just let it sit in a corner to rise, probably about an hour or so. All right. Ooh. Yeah, I didn't pay attention. So here's our beignet. As you can see, here's our beignet, all risen. So what I do is I let it rise twice. I'll just punch holes, deflate the whole thing. It's gonna rise again. So I like that sourdough taste. I'll let it rise again, and then it's ready to fry. I'm ready to start frying the beignet. As you can see, it's risen again. So you want to have everything set. So this is where I'm gonna, allow the beignet to drain right over here, and then I have my pot of oil hot and ready to go. So let's fry the beignets, make some balls. Okay, let me show you how I fry I make the balls. So you just grab about a palm full like this one. Okay, and then you're gonna form balls. Just squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Grab again like this. Squeeze between your thumb. I'm squeezing between my thumb and my index finger, just like that, and drop the balls in the hot oil. Let's do it quickly now. Forming the balls is a little bit of an art. It's a skill that you can acquire. All you do, as I'm showing you, is form the ball in your palm and then try to pass it between the space, that space between your thumb and the index finger, and just squeeze it out and form the size of the ball that you want for the puff puff or the beignet. So you keep doing that until you have just enough. You don't want too much to overcrowd the pan, the oil, sorry. So you keep the temperature of the oil even. I forgot to mention, you want it to fry at around a medium heat. You don't want it too hot, because if the oil is too hot, the puff puff would brown on the outside, and the dough will still be wet on the inside. That is very, very, very bad. So this cooks for about 5 minutes, 6 to 6 minutes for the entire thing to cook. So when it's done, you just remove it and make sure you drain as much of the oil out as you can. This thing is partly not healthy because it's fried food, right? So you make sure you drain and even use paper towels to mop up some of the oil. And your puff puff is ready. I do thank you for watching. At this point, you just enjoy your puff puff with beans or pepper sauce, because that's how we used to eat it in Cameroon. If you do try this recipe, please be sure to share with me how it turned out for you. Thanks for watching and subscribing. Until next time, bye-bye.
An African woman, strong, powerful. Let go.